There are small towns in America where something feels fundamentally wrong, where locals warn outsiders not to visit, where the past refuses to stay buried, where the darkness is so thick you can feel it pressing against your skin. I've researched 12 towns with the most disturbing histories, the strangest occurrences, and the most unsettling atmospheres in America. These aren't just ghost stories or urban legends. These are real places where real people live, and real things have happened. From mass graves to unexplained disappearances, from cult compounds to towns literally built on death, these 12 places will make your skin crawl. If you're planning a road trip through small-town America, you need to know about these places. Because once you visit, you might never be the same. Here are the top 12 creepiest small towns in the US, and why locals warn you not to visit. Before we dive in, I need to be clear, I'm not here to disrespect these towns or the people who live there. Many of these places have good people trying to move forward from dark pasts. But these towns have histories and characteristics that are genuinely disturbing. And the locals themselves often warn outsiders to stay away, not out of unfriendliness, but because they know something about their town that visitors don't understand until it's too late. I've ranked these based on several factors: documented historical events, reported paranormal activity, unexplained phenomena, crime statistics, and most importantly, warnings from people who actually live there. Some of these towns are tourist destinations that profit from their dark histories. Others desperately want to be left alone. But all of them have something deeply unsettling beneath the surface. Let's start with number 12 and count down to the town that gave me nightmares just researching it. At number 12, Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia is a town that's literally on fire, and has been since 1962. A coal mine fire ignited beneath the town over 60 years ago, and it's still burning today. The fire burns at temperatures over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit beneath the streets. Smoke rises from cracks in the ground. The earth is hot to the touch. Sinkholes open without warning and can swallow cars. At its peak, Centralia had over 1,000 residents. Today, fewer than 5 people remain. The government declared the town uninhabitable and seized it through eminent domain in the 1990s. Walking through Centralia is surreal. Empty streets where houses once stood. Abandoned churches. The famous graffiti highway covered in spray paint. And everywhere, the smell of sulfur and the sight of smoke rising from the ground like something out of hell itself. The few remaining residents refuse to leave. They live surrounded by toxic fumes, knowing the ground beneath them could collapse at any moment. Scientists estimate the coal fire could burn for another 250 years. Locals who left warn visitors, don't stay too long. The toxic gases can kill you. The sinkholes are unpredictable. And there's something about the place that gets inside your head. One former resident said, "Centralia isn't a town anymore. It's a graveyard that's still burning, and it wants to take you with it." At number 11, Cahawba, Alabama. Cahawba was Alabama's first state capital. Today, it's a ghost town with one of the most disturbing histories in the South. During the Civil War, Cahawba housed a Confederate prison where Union soldiers were held in horrific conditions. Hundreds died from disease, starvation, and violence. Their bodies were buried in mass graves around the town. After the war, Cahawba was abandoned due to repeated flooding and yellow fever outbreaks. The entire population left. Buildings rotted. Nature reclaimed the town. Today, Cahawba is an archaeological park, but locals from nearby towns refuse to go there after dark. Why? Because strange things happen in Cahawba. People report seeing figures in Confederate uniforms walking through the ruins. Voices calling out in the darkness. The sound of chains dragging across ground. Cold spots in the middle of summer heat. One park ranger described finding fresh flowers on graves that no living person had visited. Another reported his car battery dying every time he tried to leave the site, only to mysteriously restart after an hour. The most disturbing reports? People who visit Cahawba and experience vivid nightmares for weeks afterward. Nightmares of drowning, of disease, of being buried alive. Local historians warn, Cahawba remembers what happened there, and it doesn't want those memories disturbed. At number 10, Bodie, California. Bodie is one of America's most famous ghost towns, and it comes with a warning: don't take anything with you when you leave. Bodie was a gold rush boomtown in the 1870s with nearly 10,000 residents. It was known as one of the most violent, lawless towns in the West. Murders, gunfights, and robberies were daily occurrences. When the gold ran out, people abandoned Bodie almost overnight. Today, it's preserved as a state park in a condition of arrested decay. Buildings left exactly as they were when abandoned. Here's where it gets creepy. Bodie has a documented curse. Hundreds of visitors have reported that after taking souvenirs from Bodie, rocks, wood, nails, anything, they experience sudden runs of bad luck so severe they mail the items back to the park. The park receives packages regularly with letters saying things like, "Since I took this rock, I lost my job, my wife left me, and I was in a car accident. Please put it back." Park rangers have a file full of these letters. They call it the Curse of Bodie. But the curse isn't the only disturbing thing about Bodie. Visitors report seeing figures in windows of abandoned buildings. The sound of piano music when no one is there. Voices calling names. One park ranger quit after reporting he saw a little girl in 1800s clothing standing in a building. When he approached, she vanished. Locals from nearby towns say, "Visit Bodie if you want, but don't touch anything. And don't go alone." At number 9, Thurmond, West Virginia. Thurmond is a tiny railroad town with a population of 5 people. But it has one of the highest paranormal activity reports per capita in America. At its peak in the early 1900s, Thurmond was a booming coal town. But it was also incredibly violent. The town had 14 saloons and was known for gambling, prostitution, and murder. One building, the Dunglen Hotel, hosted a poker game that allegedly lasted 14 years without stopping. Men died at that table and were carried out so the game could continue. When the coal industry collapsed, Thurmond died almost overnight. Today, it's essentially a ghost town with 5 stubborn residents. But Thurmond has a reputation among paranormal investigators as one of the most actively haunted places in America. The abandoned buildings are filled with reports of shadow figures, disembodied voices, and objects moving on their own. The old railroad depot, now a visitor center, has so much reported activity that staff members refuse to work alone. One visitor described hearing a woman screaming from inside a locked, empty building. When police investigated, they found nothing. But the screaming was captured on the visitor's phone recording. The few remaining residents warn, Thurmond isn't dead. Something is still very much alive here. And it doesn't like visitors. At number 8, Cassadaga, Florida. Cassadaga is known as the psychic capital of the world, and it's one of the strangest towns in America. Founded in 1894 by spiritualists, Cassadaga is a town entirely dedicated to mediums, psychics, and paranormal activity. Nearly every building offers readings, seances, or spiritual services. Walking through Cassadaga feels like entering another dimension. The town has an otherworldly atmosphere that's impossible to describe. Even skeptics report feeling watched. But Cassadaga has a darker side that locals don't advertise to tourists. The town was built on land that was reportedly a Native American burial ground. Some say that's why it attracted spiritualists. The land was already spiritually active. Behind the tourist-friendly psychic shops, there are reports of far more disturbing activity. The Devil's Chair, located in a cemetery just outside town, is a bench where people report making deals with demonic entities. Sitting in the chair at midnight is said to summon something malevolent. Locals warn visitors, the psychics in Cassadaga are the real deal, and they're connected to forces that most people don't understand. Some of those forces are not benevolent. Former residents have reported experiencing spiritual attachments after visiting Cassadaga, presences that followed them home and caused terror for months or years. One woman reported, "I went to Cassadaga for a fun psychic reading. Something followed me home. It took 3 priests to get rid of it." At number 7, Jerome, Arizona. Jerome clings to the side of Cleopatra Hill in Arizona, and it's known as America's most vertical ghost town. At its peak, Jerome had 15,000 residents working copper mines. But the mining was brutal and deadly. Hundreds of miners died in accidents, explosions, and cave-ins. When the mines closed in 1953, the population collapsed to 50 people. Today, it's around 450, mostly artists and tourists. But Jerome has a dark reputation. The town is built on unstable ground riddled with mine shafts. Buildings literally slide down the hill. One jail famously slid 225 feet from its original location. The former Jerome Grand Hotel, now a hotel and restaurant, was originally a hospital. It's reportedly one of the most haunted buildings in America. Why? Because nearly 9,000 people died in that hospital. The building saw unimaginable suffering from mining accidents, disease, and botched surgeries. Staff and guests report constant paranormal activity, nurses in vintage uniforms, patients calling for help, the smell of ether and blood, wheelchairs moving on their own. One employee quit after seeing a man in a hospital gown walk through a wall. But the hospital isn't the only haunted location. The entire town has reports of apparitions, voices, and inexplicable events. Locals say Jerome is built on death. The copper was mined at the cost of thousands of lives. And those souls are still trapped in the tunnels beneath the town. At number 6, Ashmore, Illinois. Ashmore is a tiny town of less than 800 people, but it's home to one of the most notorious haunted locations in America, the Ashmore Estates. The Ashmore Estates was originally a poorhouse where society's outcasts, the mentally ill, the elderly, the homeless, were sent to live and die in horrific conditions. The buildings saw unimaginable suffering. Abuse was rampant. People died from neglect, disease, and violence. Bodies were buried in unmarked graves on the property. When the poorhouse closed, the building was abandoned for decades. It fell into ruin. Today, it operates as a haunted attraction and paranormal investigation site. But people who work there say the hauntings are very real. Investigators report physical attacks, scratches, pushes, being grabbed, shadow figures that chase people through hallways, disembodied voices begging for help, the sound of children crying. One investigator was hospitalized after being violently shoved downstairs by an unseen force. The basement is considered particularly dangerous. Several people have fled the basement in terror, refusing to return. Locals in Ashmore avoid the estates entirely. They know its history and want nothing to do with it. One former employee said, "The estate isn't haunted by ghosts. It's haunted by trauma. All that suffering soaked into the walls. And it's still there, waiting." At number 5, Monowi, Nebraska. Monowi has a population of 1 person. 1. Elsie Eiler is the only resident of Monowi. She's the mayor, the bartender, the librarian, and the entire population. On the surface, Monowi seems more sad than creepy. But talk to people from nearby towns, and you'll hear a different story. Monowi was once a thriving railroad town with hundreds of residents. But people left, died, or disappeared. One by one, the population dwindled until only Elsie remained. Visitors report an overwhelming sense of loneliness and despair in Monowi. The abandoned buildings, the empty streets, the single-occupied house in a town built for hundreds. But there's something else. People report feeling watched in Monowi, hearing footsteps behind them on empty streets, seeing curtains move in abandoned buildings. Elsie herself has mentioned strange occurrences, voices calling her name when no one is there, objects moving in the tavern she runs. Some paranormal investigators theorize that Monowi has so few living people that the dead outnumber the living by hundreds to 1. And they don't appreciate visitors. One visitor described Monowi as the loneliest place on earth, but somehow you never feel alone there. At number 4, St. Francisville, Louisiana. St. Francisville is a picturesque southern town with beautiful plantations and charming bed and breakfasts. But it has one of the darkest concentrations of paranormal activity in America. The town is home to the Myrtles Plantation, considered one of the most haunted houses in the United States. The Myrtles was built on a Native American burial ground. During its history, at least 10 murders occurred on the property, including the poisoning of 2 children. The most famous ghost is Chloe, a slave who allegedly poisoned the family's children and was hanged as punishment. Her spirit reportedly roams the property. But the Myrtles isn't the only haunted location in St. Francisville. The entire town is saturated with reports of paranormal activity. The Rosedown Plantation, the Grace Episcopal Church, the Oakley Plantation, all have documented hauntings. What makes St. Francisville particularly disturbing is the sheer number of reports from credible witnesses, police officers, historians, tourists who knew nothing about the town's reputation. One police officer responded to a burglary alarm at the Myrtles and saw a woman in period clothing standing on the porch. When he approached, she vanished. Locals warn, St. Francisville is beautiful during the day, but when the sun goes down, don't wander the plantation roads alone. At number 3, Dudleytown, Connecticut. Dudleytown is an abandoned settlement in the woods of Connecticut with a reputation as one of the most cursed places in America. Founded in the 1740s, Dudleytown experienced an unusual number of tragedies. Multiple residents went insane. Suicides were common. Mysterious deaths plagued the town. Families reported being stalked by shadowy creatures in the woods. By the 1800s, Dudleytown was completely abandoned. The forest reclaimed it. Today, Dudleytown is on private property and trespassing is strictly forbidden. But that doesn't stop people from sneaking in. Those who visit report overwhelming dread. The forest around Dudleytown is unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just oppressive quiet. People report seeing shadow figures moving between trees, hearing whispers in unknown languages, experiencing sudden, irrational terror that forces them to flee. Cameras malfunction. Batteries drain instantly. Electronic devices fail. Several visitors have reported psychological breaks after visiting Dudleytown. Paranoia, nightmares, suicidal thoughts. The Dark Entry Forest Association, which owns the land, has sealed it off specifically because of the danger, both legal and otherwise. Locals from nearby Cornwall refuse to discuss Dudleytown. When pressed, they simply say, "Some places should stay forgotten." At number 2, Guthrie, Oklahoma. Guthrie is a small town with beautiful Victorian architecture and a disturbing secret. It was built on a mass grave. During the land run of 1889, thousands of people rushed to claim free land. Many died in the chaos, trampled, shot, or killed in accidents. Their bodies were buried in mass graves beneath what would become Guthrie. But the town's dark history doesn't end there. Guthrie was a lawless frontier town with rampant violence. The town had so many murders that hangings were public entertainment. The old Masonic temple in Guthrie is considered one of the most haunted buildings in America. The building has a dark history involving secret rituals and unexplained deaths. Tour guides report constant paranormal activity, disembodied footsteps, voices, shadow figures, objects moving. The Scottish Rite Temple's basement is particularly disturbing. Several visitors have fled in terror, reporting overwhelming feelings of being unwanted and threatened. But the entire town of Guthrie has a dark undercurrent. Many buildings report hauntings. The old cemetery has numerous reports of apparitions. Locals say Guthrie was built on violence and death, and that foundation seeps up through the ground. One longtime resident said, "Guthrie is a beautiful town with an ugly soul. The past is always right beneath the surface." And the number 1 creepiest small town in America, Helltown, Ohio. Helltown isn't the official name, it's Boston, Ohio. But everyone calls it Helltown, and for good reason. In the 1970s, the government evicted all residents through eminent domain to create a national park. But the park was never built. The town was simply abandoned. What happened next created one of America's most disturbing urban legends, except locals insist it's not a legend. The abandoned town became a site for satanic rituals. The Pentagram Road, a road that forms a near-perfect pentagram shape, is said to be the center of occult activity. The Old Mother of Sorrows Church became known as a site for dark rituals. Visitors report seeing robed figures conducting ceremonies. But the most disturbing reports involve the Helltown mutants, people allegedly experimented on by the government who now live in the abandoned town. Multiple visitors report being chased by deformed individuals. Park rangers have found evidence of people living in the abandoned buildings. The most famous location is the Stanford House, where a woman allegedly went insane and killed her family. Visitors report hearing screams and seeing apparitions. The end of the world is a steep dead-end road that drops off suddenly. Locals say if you drive to the end and turn off your car, it won't restart, and something will emerge from the woods. Current residents of nearby towns refuse to enter Helltown after dark. Some refuse to enter at all. One former park ranger said, "I've worked in parks across America. Helltown is the only place I've ever been genuinely afraid. There's something wrong there. Something that predates the town itself." So there you have it. The 12 creepiest small towns in America, where locals themselves warn you not to visit. From Centralia's eternal underground fire to Helltown's satanic rituals and government experiments, these places prove that America's small towns hide some truly dark secrets. Now, are all the stories true? Some are documented fact. Centralia really is on fire. Dudleytown really was abandoned under mysterious circumstances. The Ashmore estates really did house suffering people. Other stories, the hauntings, the curses, the supernatural elements, those are harder to verify. but the sheer number of independent reports from credible witnesses suggests something is happening in these places that we don't fully understand. Should you visit these towns? That's your decision. Some are tourist destinations that welcome visitors. Others strictly forbid trespassing. But if you do visit, respect the locations. Respect the people who live there. And most importantly, respect the warnings. Because these towns earned their reputations for a reason. If you enjoyed this deep dive into America's creepiest small towns, smash that subscribe button. I researched the dark corners of America so you don't have to. Drop a comment. Have you been to any of these towns? What was your experience? Or do you know an even creepier town that should have made this list? Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, not every small town is as peaceful as it looks.